Welcome to the Crossing Faiths podcast. My name is Matt Hawkins. This is the podcast where a Christian, that's me, and a Muslim talk religion and politics. John Pinna, my fake Muslim friend. Welcome back to Crossing Faiths.
What's going on, buddy? You know, I accept all superlatives. You know, I'll just say it right now. So I'm just coming off of UNGA, you know, the UN General Assembly meeting, and we had talked about this before we went on the air. So just so everybody knows,
are you or are you not a real Muslim, John Pinna?
So here's the problem. You know, I don't know what happens in Christian communities, but I'm sure there's varying degrees of who's faithful and who's not. So, you know, I think I wear my family story on my sleeve. You know, I've always been very transparent about that stuff. But the challenge is like, here's the thing. First of all, it's no one's call. How about that? You know, whoever's, you know, adheres to Islam is between them and Allah, right? And them and the Ummah, the community, right? So, but here's the deal. I'll do it right now. La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
That's the Shahada. So that says Allah is the only God, and Mo is his prophet. Okay, so that's I just converted.
That's standard, right? That's
just did it just now.
So if you weren't before this podcast,
if I wasn't before,
you are now.
I just did it. So. You know, so it's very simple. La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. You say it 3 times, you're done. All right. So here's the problem.
So well, let me. You've got the problem. Hold that.
Right.
I see that question come from 2 different angles, at least. You probably see more, but I see it from at least 2 different angles. I see it, number one, from certain sects within Islam claiming to be, quote, true Islam. Right.
Sure.
Now I want to talk about that in no particular order. If there's anyone to define what true Islam is, it's presumably other Muslims, right? So on the one hand, that's a category unto itself, and people have gripes and you have opinions, and like we're going to talk about that. But there's another category, another direction from which this question comes, and that is from other non-Muslims. Most often, and other non-Muslims who are often of my own tribe, either Caucasian Americans or white evangelicals or people who are at least culturally Christian, maybe not theologically Christian, people who are ramped up in this post 9/11 world, or are especially sensitized, oversensitized maybe, to the world of, you know, Islamic terror, and so I find people I know, people who might associate with my either political or religious tribe, and sometimes even friends, who somehow are confident enough in their knowledge of Islam that they think they can pick and choose and identify who is a, quote, true Muslim versus who is not. So I want to talk about this. This is a fascinating dilemma.
Right, and can vocalize it to a Muslim.
Right.
That's you're not a real Muslim, right?
Yeah.
You're this and that. So I'm at UNGA, the UN General Assembly, which, admittedly, it was a great event where the president announced that they're going to protect holy sites and artifacts and places of worship. How cool is that?
It's pretty cool.
Okay. It harkens back to our pilot, right, where we're talking about the staff, the Moses staff, and the Jesus nails.
Right.
So, which the DNA, we could get multiple prophets, right? So, so that, you know, that and Caiaphas. So, and I did have the Caiaphas conversation with the evangelicals at UNGA. As you know, hearkening back to our previous conversation about how we need to bring that name back.
If folks missed our second pilot episode, all this will make a lot more sense.
Essentially, it's a really quick argument. If Caiaphas, the guy who killed Jesus, if it was providential, which is your business, right? This whole thing of then it was meant to be, and it really wasn't Caiaphas's fault. And I think Caiaphas is a really good name. So one of the best names ever invented.
Because it's providential, we can't hold animus against him because he participated in the execution of Christ. That's your working. Right. That's your working thesis.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, anyways, I just think it's the coolest name, Caiaphas. But no one can be named that because he murdered Jesus. It's terrible. Okay, so the evangelicals did not appreciate the argument at Unga. Let me just say that right now. I'm 90% sure that if there was poison, it would have gone in the punch. So
someone had to escort you out quietly.
An evangelical says, like, we got to go. He's like, we should leave the room. It's like they're not buying this at all. So it was they all can't be singers. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I was wonderful speech about, and I was a guest of the White House and very thoughtful invitation to bring a multi-faith crew up there.
Yeah.
And then I was speaking to, how passionate I am about the elders of the International Religious Freedom Movement. And I think that the elders of the International Religious Freedom Movement have really not done a very good job at stewarding international religious freedom. We are at the worst international religious freedom that we've ever been. 70% of the world is faithful, but 80% of that population is religiously persecuted globally.
Yeah.
Which means, and it's on the rise, which means that the 20 years since IRFA, the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, these elders, have not stewarded IRFA properly.
Yeah.
And the International Religious Freedom Movement.
And in cooperation with varying levels of commitment, competence, and I don't know, sincerity on the part of elected officials and politicians. So it's not just
right, but right. These are the advocates, and these are the people that should be. And I plead a pretty heavy argument about them, a lot of these people serving self-interest of their own NGOs. Anyways, one of the elders comes up to me, and we start talking, and I'm not gonna call him out on this one. And we start talking about... It's the assertion
that matters. It's not the personality here that matters.
Yeah, I'm not gonna burn him to the ground. But one of the elders comes to me who I'm semi-critical of, and but always have collaborated with in good faith. And we start talking about one of his employees, and he says, "Wow, I had misgivings about this person, but he's a good Muslim, and not like the fake Muslims out there." And this guy is Catholic, and he's saying that to me, and I go, what do you mean fake Muslim? What does that mean? And he goes, well, there's a lot of fake Muslims out there. It's like cultural Christians, and I go, so what's the criteria? I go, because this is the struggle that we have in Islam. One sect wants to interpret religious text, define what a Muslim is, and tell you how to be a Muslim, and that's the problem. The problem is that when there's, and I'm mixing the two subjects, right? So if we go into the Ummah, into the Muslim community, Wahhabis, generally, on the Sunni side, it's a sect of there's 4 major schools on the Sunni side. Uh-huh. One of those schools is the Hanbali, and from the Hanbali you get these guys, the Wahhabis and Salafis, and that end up moving in the direction of ISIS and Al Qaeda and Taliban and all that. That's where you end up getting that from that offshoot, one of the 4 schools. So you could be a Wahhabi and not be violent. So we're not talking about violence right now. Right. We're talking about defining Islam. They want to define Islam under a very rigid interpretation.
Yeah.
And that means interpret religious text, define what a Muslim is, and tell you how to do it. Yeah. So
Taliban. Would you describe that? Would you translate that into a kind of fundamentalist? Is that a disparaging term, accurate term, imprecise term?
So the challenge is that fundamentalist outside of Islam means someone who's an extremist. Fundamentalist in Islam means somebody who just follows the fundamentals, right? So you have some people that they pray 5 times a day.
Yeah.
They go to Jummah prayer on Friday. They just do this, and they go through the motions, and and they live a good, mellow, happy life, but they're not they're not getting into the weeds with Islam. You know what I mean? Like they'll read the Quran during Ramadan. They'll fast.
Right.
They do all the things you're supposed to do.
Right.
But and I'm not devaluing that religious existence. I wish I was more like that. I mean, I'm Ismaili, right? So we're like Islam after hours. We have, the mysticism and ritual behind things. We believe in hidden meetings. We believe in all this really good stuff. And so, and faith in action. So we believe in a lot of this. So it gives us, and that's what comforts us, right? And so, Sufism is very esoteric, and you could be a Sufi on the Shia or Sunni side, which is music, meditation, trances, and all kinds of other good stuff. So I think that when it comes to someone who's a fundamentalist who follows just the fundamentals, there's something something really cool about cutting all the meat away, or the fat away, and just doing the bare bones sort of ascetic lifestyle. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to these guys, like Wahhabis, that's an anti-colonial movement. It's really a political movement with the cloak of religion. ISIS, they like to think that they're religious. They're not. They're really just a bunch of mercenaries, fooling around in the desert. So, but this has been the struggle in America and globally with the Islamic community. The majority of Muslims just want to live their life. Yeah. They just want to pray. They just want to slot out. They just want to do their thing. And I'm not bashing Sunnis here with the Hanbalis. I'm not doing that.
Yeah. We're just
on the Shia side.
You're just trying to provide some definition among respective tribes in Islam to someone like me who is a non-Muslim who's not terribly familiar, and I'm just trying to understand it, right? So you're trying to best you can, knowing your place in the Islamic sphere, detail for me all these different categories.
We were proto-terrorists. Ismailis were proto-terrorists. The word assassin comes from our sect of Islam. The word is asas. There's a misconception that the word assassin comes from hashish, and that the Ismailis smoked hashish before they murdered people, but that's not where it comes from. The word assassin comes from the word asas, which asas is Persian for base, and the Ismaili population had a series of forts all through the Middle East, which is now Israel, and all the way through into Persia, which is now Iran. And with a central keep called Alamut in Iran, what's in present day Iran now. And the philosophy was that, and this is a Shia sect, that out of the Fatimid kingdom, that the whole Islamic enterprise went off the rails. So a warrior sect needed to emerge. To implement what's called ISO, which is Greek for equal. And anytime any Muslim went off the rails a little bit, they got themselves killed.
Yeah.
Now this is back in the day, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about thousands, 1,100, 1,200.
Yeah.
So that's where the word assassin comes from. And of course there's been myths and all kinds of legends about how Ismailis were killing everybody all over the place. But generally, they were handling when the Islamic enterprise went off track, they would take it upon themselves to correct it.
Yeah. So I think so. Not to interrupt.
That doesn't exist anymore. So just as a disclaimer, Ismailis are now serve something larger than themselves. They open schools and hospitals all over the world, and they do all that stuff. So that doesn't exist anymore. But on the Shia side, you will have extremist groups that and the best example on the Shia side is the Supreme Council of Iran. Those guys are Shia 12ers. They follow to the 12th Imam, and they're pretty much maniacs. And they define what Islam is. They tell you how to be Muslim, and interpret religious text in a very rigid manner.
Yeah. So to the second part of my question. People without Islam, people outside the faith, people in this post 9/11 world look at Islam and they hear that kind of account of the early days of Ismailis, right? Mm. And there's a history, an early history, again, in another time and place, of militancy, violence, order, and enforcement through death, that kind of thing. And then they fast forward to our current predicament of extremism. It's maybe not so much of a jump to think, well, maybe this violence thing is inherent in Islam. That's the kind of question that people in my orbit tend to ask. Like, well, we see that history way back there. This is what we're seeing today. Must be something inside. So therefore, that's part of where this question comes in, is to be a true quote unquote Muslim. That's ultimately where it's headed. How do you respond to that?
I respond that there's been holy warriors of every religion, period.
Right.
And the Bible is a book of warfare. That's all it is. It's a book of warfare. Certainly, the Old Testament, about when the Hebrews rock into the Holy Land and displace all those people and murder them all.
Right.
I mean, it's outrageous. As we go through the Old Testament.
Not surprisingly, I have a slightly different take on the history, but go. I'm not interrupt.
It's a book of war, and I would argue. I think it's a pretty decent argument, but the challenge is that I think there's violence in all religious texts, and the violence that's in religious texts are parables, stories, and histories. And those histories are maybe not so nice.
Yeah.
The reality is that Islam is Abrahamic. It's the same stories that you guys have. It really dovetails really very, very nicely in the what I've spoken in earlier episodes about Abrahamic lineage. There is a difference. There's the prophet and the bloodline to the end of days, if you're on the Shia side, and then there's schools of jurisprudence that come from the prophet. But I would argue that there is no more violence, to talk about violence in the Quran, than there is anywhere else in any other religious books, including the Bible. That's one. And two, it's strictly forbidden to be aggressive and to aggressively attack or to hurt anyone. But of course, you can cherry pick and you can editorialize the Quran and to justify your point, just like you could take points out of the Bible and start and use it to justify violence as well. So what's that? There's the thing about the armor, the shield. Put on the shield, the armor of God, and go forth. Do you know what I'm talking about? I got one of these.
Put on the armor of God.
So that's something that Crusaders weren't rocking into the Holy Land without having religious justification for it, and religious justification not just from the Pope saying it. There was biblical text that they used to justify their violence, just like the British in Ireland, just like the Serbs in Bosnia. And Croats in Bosnia, and Kosovo, just like, which is that's recent, just like the 100 Years War and all these other different what's it called, the great the schism, right, between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, but then also the Reformation. The Reformation, that wasn't a peaceful split.
Definitely not.
And you guys were murdering each other all the way up to.
Yeah. Including other Protestants. It wasn't just Protestant versus Roman Catholics. It was a lot of Protestant on Protestant violence.
Right. So here's the thing. Anytime anybody says that, and then people say, "Well, that was long ago." I go, "No, it wasn't. You had 100 years that the Brits and the Irish were at war, a holy war, 100 years, all the way up to the 90s. And the same thing, like I said, with the Serbs and the Croats with Bosnia. And it wasn't, I don't even know if it was really biblical, but Mitterrand and John Major both said we want to restore a Christian Europe.
Yeah.
So by saying that, so what does that mean? Explicitly, it means let the Serbs murder the Bosnians. Let the Croats murder the Bosnians because we want to restore a Christian Europe. So I justify that to me, that statement.
Right.
If we're all supposed to be tolerant and we're all supposed to be this and that, and I know it's not your tribe, but you see what I'm saying? But this is my answer to you.
Right. So one of the responses to the question of violence in the Old Testament from a Christian perspective is that we recognize that there's a difference between descriptive content in the Bible and proscriptive content, right? So
right.
we read particularly Israel wiping out Jericho and other non-Jewish folks as a unique time and place and under the direct authority of God. Like it or leave it, to unpack that, we believe there are theological reasons for that, but that's a different thing than taking those passages of violence and using those as proscriptive recommendations or marching orders for any day and time and place, including the present.
But it's the same thing in the Quran, though. That's the problem,
and that's what I want to ask you: is that do you make the same apologetic defense from the Quran similar to the Christian take on the Old Testament violence?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say absolutely. When people say that it's a religion of peace, the problem is, the challenge is that it's all packed in this one book, right? So and because it's as if Allah is talking to you. It's living text. There's a tendency for people to try to manipulate that into action items. And that's where it gets a little bit off the rails.
Right.
But again, if you're going to ask me about Wahhabism, political movement. So it just like something that would be, very, very, or very similar in Christianity. It's an anti-colonial movement meant at attacking the West. And doing whatever it can be to be as disruptive as possible to the colonials, and at the same time garner as much support internally within the Muslim community by using religious rhetoric. Look, I just did the Shahada, right? I just did it.
Yeah.
I had a girlfriend that I went out with for 6 months. For the first 3 months, we would argue back and forth on whether or not ISIS were Muslim. And she said, well, they did the Shahada. They accepted the Prophet. They're Muslim. And I go, but they violate the maxims. Once they violate the maxims, they cease to be Muslim. No. They're Muslim. That's between them and Allah. It's not for me to judge.
Uh-huh.
And I go, you guys judge everybody. She was a Sunni. I used to joke that she was a Wahhabi, but she wasn't a Wahhabi, but she was strict, I would say. And so we would have this conversation back and forth, and it took me 3 months to get to the point where I said, go to your imam and ask your imam. And she went to her imam, and her mom goes, they're not Muslim. They're a cult. They violated the maxims. He said the same stuff that I did independently of me.
Uh-huh.
And we talked about the maxims, that if you're going to wage war, jihad, if you're going to wage it, then there's specific rules: no killing women and children, no hitting targets indiscriminately, blah, 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 blah. Once you violate that, it's such an important rule. It's called a maxim. You cease to be Muslim. Islam has these rules.
Yeah.
And it's very there's certain points where it's black and white. She still, after her mom told her, she said she's had a hard time processing not only the 3 months, but what her imam told her.
Wow.
And why? Because there's a hadith. So there's three things, right? So you have the Quran, which is the book. You have the Sunnah, which is how the Prophet lived. And then you have the hadiths, which are sayings, and they're attributed to the Prophet.
Yeah.
So because there's a saying, a hadith that says that no Muslim can judge another Muslim, and I'm paraphrasing, she was like, then since they do the Shahada, it's not my place to say they're not Muslim. Now, as an Ismaili, I've been told I haven't been Muslim my entire life.
Yeah.
By other Muslims. So I was like, well, you guys love to criticize people. If a Muslim drinks, then they say, oh, you're not Muslim, or you're fake Muslim, right? You pretend this, you pretend that. I was not our community was not part of Islam till it was accepted into the Ummah in 2004, 2005 with the Amman message, the Amman conference in Amman, Jordan.
Wow. 2004.
So 2004, Ismailis were not considered Muslim, and the problem is that you were persecuted, right? So there's this thing called taqiyya, which is it's the precaution of pretending to be another faith. Okay. So this is a big thing for Shia, because a lot of times you have to pretend not to be Shia. So I'll give you a good example. I went up to the Alexa Mosque in Israel. I go to Alexa Mosque and I start praying. And a bunch of Sunnis came up to me and said, "You're not praying right. Let me show you how." And I'm like, no, I have these conversations here, and everybody makes fun of me. They say, "Oh, Sunni and Shia, that's all doesn't happen." It only, but most of the people that say that are Sunni. If someone's been persecuted, like I know how to pray Sunni style. When I go to a mosque, I pray Sunni style because I'm not gonna. Otherwise, I get harassed.
Yeah.
Now when I worked at AIC, the American Islamic Congress, I would made it a point to pray the way I pray.
Yeah.
And as a civil disobedience type of thing. All right. So what's the difference between? So it was, how disruptive I was back then. Now I've softened quite a bit, but that was also part of my job. My job was to salah, pray with everybody, as many sects as possible, and I would learn how they prayed, and then I would also pray myself, and I would go into every masjid I possibly could and learn and build bonds and do all this stuff, right? But generally, if you really wanted to know, Shia will pray with their hands at their sides, and they like to have this thing called the sajdaka, which is a piece of the soil that you rest when you go down into ruku. You're gonna put your head on the prayer rug or janamaz, and they have a little stone there that they put their head on that's from a holy place. And in this and for Shia it's usually from Karbala, right? From the Battle of Karbala. We covered that in the previous episode. Sunnis don't do that. Sunnis pray with their hands crossed over their chest and or stomach, and they don't need a sajdaka. They don't even need the janamaz. They just need something to rest their head on. So there's a little bit more ritual. And I'm not saying any's better or worse or anything else. I was surprised at some of the way in which my Sunni brothers and sisters pray. Are they Muslim? Absolutely. Is it different? Sure. Should they be doing things differently? No. Enjoy yourselves. Yeah. But the problem is that the challenge is that they will come to you and tell you, no, you're not praying right. No, you need to do this. So at the Alexa Mosque, I prayed Sunni style because I wasn't going to get harassed, and I wasn't going to get mobbed or even worse.
So here's a comparison point between Muslims and Christians in North America in particular. My neighborhood, for example, I go to my Baptist church. Walking distance are like two other Baptist churches and a Church of Christ. And then other parts of town, there's obviously Presbyterian churches, right? There's a Catholic church. Why do you have to go to a Sunni mosque, John, in North America? Why don't you just go to a Shia mosque?
Well, there are Shia mosques here. So the challenge is,
why is the North American context unique? In reply to that question, is kind of what I'm getting at.
So no, I mean, I go to Shia mosques. I mean, I'll go to a Shia mosque, but generally the Shia mosques are 12er mosques.
Yeah, right.
So there's only one JK, Jamaat Kona. So Ismailis or Shmalis, whatever you want to say, go to what's called a Jamaat Kona. Jamaat Kona is like a house of food,
okay,
right? Sustenance. There's only one here in Washington area, and that's way out in Falls Church.
Okay.
And if you were going to go to it, it's like hidden because so. And then but the big Ismaili population is in Texas, right? That's a huge. They have, and then in Toronto, they have these great, sort of awesome JKs, right? Where am I going to go to sell it out? And I'm isolated. I'm unique because my family is fourth generation refugees, right, from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So my family. When I say I'm a multi-faith family, this is what happens. The family breaks apart religiously, and that doesn't mean morally, but they move into different. So we have a Christian side of the family, there's a Jewish side of the family, there's a Muslim side of the family. That's how it is.
Yeah.
And that opens the door up to say, oh, you're fake Muslim, or you're this, or you're that. So I might be in touch with my religious roots, but then I'll get people to say the same thing. Oh, you're not Afghan. What do you mean I'm not Afghan? Who are you to say make that call?
Yeah. So
I just got a text about that 2 days ago. Someone goes, "Well, I have some friends that have some problems with your Afghanness," and I go, "Well, here's the thing. I know my family history and what we're about. My great grandfather died when I was 10. My grandfather died when I was 38. Here's the thing. I know who I am and what I'm about." And the challenge is, and we even took the blood test. What's it called?
Yeah.
And we're my father's like 90% Greek and 10% Uzbek.
Yeah.
And we're Greeks from Asia, the Asian of Hellenism.
Sure.
So it's similar when it comes to culturally, right? So it's not just a religious question. People do it all the time when they are questioning people's identities.
Yeah. So I think part of what I think is interesting for North American Christians to hear, and tell me if this is an accurate parallel, as if we as Christians were minorities in a non-Christian culture somewhere, and there was a plethora or a diversity of Christians who needed a place to worship in town, but there was only one church building, and yet you would have to share the space with, as a Baptist, with, say, Presbyterians or Methodists or Anglicans or Assembly of God or Catholics, and you all would have to worship in the same place, right? And so that interaction, even though it's all within the big picture of Christianity, there's an ecumenical trade-off and interaction, even though from the outside it looks like the same people. Is that a fair parallel?
Yeah, there's 213 different sects of Christianity, and we all know that the only people that got it right the only people that have gotten it right are the Mormons. So you guys. See, look at you laughing right there. It just happened. We just did it. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, they're the only guys that have access to heaven, as far as I know.
As far as you know.
So what do you? Yes. So, but I will. Go to a Catholic ritual. Go to they got the Eucharist. It becomes the blood and the body of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I would be prohibited from. Which I would be appropriately prohibited from taking in a Catholic context.
Right.
As a Baptist.
And then you got the Jesus abs. Is it? He's the
we
Jesus
don't have
statue.
the Jesus abs. It's the Catholics that have the Jesus abs.
Right, and then but the Eastern Orthodox have the pictures, right? They got the icons of the Jesus abs.
Right. Yeah.
The original six-pack.
Yeah.
So,
are you going
to cut that out? You're going to cut that out, aren't you?
No, I'm going to let it in so I can say you've done it and we can get past it. What listeners don't know is you've been waiting to work that into an episode.
Well, because when I exercise, I'm trying to get that Jesus on the cross thing, because I know you're gonna do that.
But you wanted to heckle me about Jesus on the cross and the crucifix. I was like, that's not my tribe.
Yeah. So I guess the challenge is that back to this whole thing is that we get hammered. Forget about violence. Taqiyya. Anti-Muslims will say, well, Taqiyya, you guys have permission in your religion to lie. So you guys are deceitful.
Right.
So this is where it goes. You're deceitful. So therefore you guys are subversive. So therefore you guys can't be trusted. And therefore we need to be monitoring you. And therefore you need this. This is the logic train.
Right.
And the reason why Taqiyya exists is because I was not part of Islam till 2004. I went last November in 2018 to Israel in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and guess what? The Sunnis they made sure that I prayed a certain way.
Yeah.
And if I didn't, I got harassed.
Yeah.
And I was there with I was there as a guest of the Israeli government, and wonderful. I mean, like, they were very gracious, and it was an unbelievable trip. I'm not going to say it wasn't. And then it was a wonderful trip. But I was there with other Sunnis too. They weren't oppressive. They weren't like this, but they were doing things, and there was a lot of questions back and forth, and they were very thoughtful. But there was a strong Sunni population. The guy right next to me started tapping me, and he was like, "No, you need to be like this." And I'm like, "Mind your own business, buddy." And then before you know it, but you understand, you've seen everybody prays, right?
Yeah.
So we're all salating out, and everybody's in a line, and it's rows.
Yeah.
It could very easily get out of hand.
Yeah.
Very easily get out of hand. Yeah. And the worst harassment I've had is here in the United States. Huh. Worst harassment that I've ever had is here in the United States.
By other Muslims.
By other Muslims. And the best experiences that I've ever had, two places. In Afghanistan, no one cares. Yeah. I could go into any of the mosques there and no one cares. Now, maybe it's different. I did get yelled at when I was in Kandahar. This guy did attack me when I came out and said I didn't pray right and I need to go back into the mosque. He started hitting me with a stick, and then I grabbed the stick, and then we started talking. We started yelling at each other, and then everybody goes, "He's Taliban," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." I go, "Well, how do I know he knows? How do I know he knows how to pray?" And then, but he was actually really. It's a really thoughtful story. He actually then went back in with me and prayed with me, which was interesting. I'm not gonna. But I was like, how do I know this guy's Muslim? Yeah. What do you mean? And so we started getting this whole thing. But when I was in Kabul, Herat, it didn't matter. Mazar, Kunduz, it didn't matter. Even Jalalabad, I could go into any place and I could slot out my own way, and no one bothered me. And I surprisingly, and admittedly, and I'm going to give Afghanistan a plug here. In their constitution, it says that they're a Muslim country, Article 1. Article 2 says that all other religions will be protected. It's in their constitution. Yeah. It's in Article 2. And then in Article 7 says that they're going to adhere to the UDHR. They have the Minister of Hajj, and then they also have the Ulama Council. The Ulama Council regulates religious freedom within the country. And the Taliban attacked them about a year ago for advocating for religious freedom. And there are religious groups that are attacked, but it's not because they're a religion in Afghanistan. It's because it's a war zone. Right. It fluctuates between conflict and post-conflict. And people mistake ethnicity, for example, or political affiliation for religious persecution. For example, there might be a group that backs a certain party, and then they get attacked for that, and they go, "Oh, they're Shia," so they must be persecuting Shia. So, but Afghanistan's got it. Tunisia's got it. There's a lot of good Muslim countries out there that are executing the law and the living word of Allah in the Quran very, very well, in a very thoughtful manner.
Yeah, and in very difficult context, namely war zones. Well, so coming back to our question, is that given that complexity and given the conflict, even when it's peaceful, given the conflict within Islamic circles, it just seems preposterous to me anytime a non-Muslim, especially in an American context, presumes to know what true Islam is and be able to choose between Sufi and Sunni and Ismaili and Ahmadiyya or even ISIS and be like, look, Muslims haven't figured this out or agreed to it. Like, who am I as an evangelical Christian to presume I know enough about the faith to dictate and tell who is and is not a true Muslim? That just seems preposterous. It's one thing for you and other Muslims to do it and to duke it out amongst yourselves. That's part of freedom of conscience and part of trying to figure out what in a Christian context is a little orthodox. Like what's the meat? What's the focus of what it requires to be either a Muslim or a Christian, right? That's one thing for it to happen intra-faith. It's another thing for someone outside the faith. So it'd be like you, John, as an Ismaili Muslim, to say the Presbyterians are the one that's got it right, and all you Baptists and Methodists and Catholics. I said it.
Right? I already said it.
You already said it. Right. You said the Mormons are the true Christians, right? It's as preposterous for me to be like, the Sufis are the ones that are the true Muslims, or the Sunnis, those violent ones over there, or the violent ones within the Sunni sect. Like, those are the true Muslims. That's where this is all headed. It's just preposterous to me.
That's what I find. So first of all, anybody can criticize Islam, right? Because of 9/11, and everybody has license to do it. It doesn't matter what corner of the planet you come from, right? And so I was doing a talk in Manassas. An old family friend invited a bunch of Muslims over, and I was the only one. I felt compelled to go, but no one felt safe enough to go. This was 2 years ago. This is when I came back from Afghanistan. 3 years ago when I came back from Afghanistan, and I was the only guy who said, "Well, I feel compelled to go." We went, and it was just locals from Manassas, and it was just really interesting. It was I would walk them through a conversation, and they would say, "Well, I'm not sure I believe you. I read this online. I read that online. And I go, so this is the first time you're meeting a Muslim, and a Muslim's talking to you. I'm a pluralist who happens to be a Muslim, and I at one point represented the Ummah nationally when I was working at the American Islamic Congress, and I was the director of government and international relations. And yet, you're telling me what my religion is about." Yeah, and what the Ummah is. That's what you're saying. The communities, and it was like, well, online it says this, so I have to go. I have to go with my resources.
Thank you, internet.
So I'm sitting there going, okay, and we it wasn't an argument, but it was just It was.
At least they were candid enough to tell you, why they weren't right,
Yeah, and I said, I'm not selling anything. It's just, this is how it is. I go, here we are right now, and I'm not violent. Let's just start with that. And you're not implicitly, you're explicitly insulting me and insulting my faith. And you're explicitly insulting my community. And not only that, you're telling me I'm wrong. And his answer was, this is one guy in particular, his answer was, well, you're a fish out of water here. If you do something, we'll overtake you.
Gosh.
So, so I go, so you're not really here to have a conversation. You're here to tell me about my religion, and you're really here to tell me you're on watch.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the fact is that people don't connect that Islam has been part of our country since its beginning. Religious freedom is part of our country. The president, with all his faults, espouses this. The vice president, with all his faults, espouses this. And that our founding principles of our country, religious freedom, and advocate. The speech was very thoughtful at UNGA, at the General Assembly, where they mentioned Muslims and Christians and persecution and all kinds of other stuff. It was a very, very thoughtful speech.
Yeah.
Hats off to Stephen Miller for that one. Hats off to that guy.
I'm sure that's where credit lies for that speech, John.
He's the speechwriter, man. So he's the guy.
Speechwriter.
Well,
I imagine the State Department folks took the lead on this one.
Maybe, but I think it was a wonderful. This administration has done wonderful things for religious freedom, but I of course I sharpshoot a lot about the accomplishments. I mean, the ministerial certainly one of them. Yeah. That annual event, and the release of Pastor Brunson, and some of these things. But the fact that the rhetoric is out there,
yeah.
The fact that the statements are made, the fact that the positioning of religious freedom as a founding principle of our country is amazing. This is one thing you can't take away from the president: the connection between George Washington,
yeah,
and advocacy for religious communities,
yeah,
and Donald Trump. And I don't think anybody has made that connection. And it was made here on Crossing Faith. I mean, Imagine that. That is profound, and it shows a direct line to our founding principles of our country and one of our founding fathers. I'm a Hamiltonian, so that's one of my guys.
Yeah.
George Washington's one of my other guys, and then the founding mother is Dolly Madison.
Yeah. My main maybe only quibble with the president's address at the UN was he made, and this is, I imagine this, well, maybe it was in the remarks, the printed remarks. I suspect it was an offhanded comment, but he said something about, quote, obliterating the Johnson Amendment.
Yeah.
The Johnson Amendment is probably too lengthy to get into here, but for the record, nothing has been changed to the actual Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment, as legislated, as part of U.S. law, is still technically in effect, even if this administration, as with virtually all prior administrations, is not enforcing it. The Johnson Amendment is functionally still in place and would take actually congressional bill to change it. So that's my only quibble, right. But that's a domestic thing. The focus on the UN thing was about religious freedom abroad, and in particular, religious sites and houses of worship, on which we can all agree.
Yeah, no, I think the statement was amazing. I'm curious to see what the action items are.
Right.
I'm very critical about action, and because I'm a practitioner, so I
sure.
wonder.
Right.
We had the two ministerials. The first ministerial, we had the Potomac Declaration that came out of that fell flat. There was the Pastor Brunson release.
Yeah.
They started this global emergency fund for religious communities, which is now about $5 million. And they used about $500,000, deployed that out to NGOs. But if you ask the Department of State which NGOs, they say for safety reasons we can't disclose. So yeah. I get nervous that goes to groups proselytizing in the Middle East. I really don't know.
Yeah.
But they can't refute any of that.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a trust and verify situation. I mean, they're not wrong about safety precautions, right, or security precautions.
Yeah, I mean, so I get that to a certain degree, but and so I think I'm critical about what happened between the ministerials and what happened post this ministerial. Yeah. There's the global Religious Freedom Alliance now, and they're going to link that with this was announced yesterday. They're going to announce they announced a business alliance, and so I that's good. I mean, I hope that these things happen, and then they end up getting what's it called? They end up mobilizing and having some net results. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the rhetoric, the policies, the implementation, and having an ambassador that's active is quite different than what's happened in the past.
Yeah.
An ambassador for international religious freedom. So I do think that there's some amazing things happening, and those in itself are accomplishments.
Yeah, certainly on this issue, the international religious freedom, there's certainly a high water mark of, in a good sense, political interest and power in a way that we haven't seen across Republican and Democrat administrations.
Yeah, I think so.
Obviously, I mean, the contexts were different, but the fact that the president's delivering those remarks at the UN and not merely Secretary of State or merely the Vice President or merely an ambassador. I mean, the fact that it's anybody from the White House offices, including the Vice President, that's a big deal for any issue to get that kind of attention from. And obviously, even Brownbacks, even if the President and Vice President weren't at that meeting, Brownback clearly has buy-in from well above him, which that kind of buy-in from an administration, both under Bush and both under Obama, that fluctuated drastically.
Right.
On the international religious freedom issue. So,
so I'm good. Yeah. So I'm kind of like, so I think it's amazing, but so I mean, do we have time to talk about, I got like a bunch of burning desires on this one.
I know we're past 50 minutes, man. We're nearing the end. We got time for a little bit more, but I think we're nearing the end. What else you got? Right, so, we might have to table, because we got a stack of stuff, but we might have to table some of this stuff.
We got to talk about saying the Lord's name in vain. We got to start. We got to do that one.
I don't know if we have time for that one.
Well, so let's just start. As a New Yorker, we get a free pass on that one. Okay. All right. I think all New Yorkers get the free pass on that one.
We'll consider a deep dive in this issue for a later episode. But go ahead.
So that's one. Two is I just don't. So that I'm carving away at this crucifixion business, right? So if Hazrat Isa was he ascended, right? He was so in Islam raised bodily to heaven, right? And he's with Allah and hanging out until the end of days when he's going to open up a can on the Dajjal, the Antichrist. How is that any different than he still ascended? How is that any different than you guys? What difference does it make of this whole business with the crucifixion? Why can't the ascension be the act? The priesthood was there, and the ascension, he ascended. This is such a big question, isn't it?
I got two big answers for you.
Okay, I'm just saying.
And I think we've touched on this before, but I'll answer it again.
All right. Yeah. You're gonna give me the Lamb of God speech. I think that's what you're gonna give me.
Well, if you want to call it that, it would fit in with that. But yeah,
I know, and I don't mean that to sound patronizing.
No, you're not. I know you're not patronizing. Yeah, you're being you're speaking with brevity.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a big Hazrat Isa guy. I'm a big Jesus guy. So, all right. So he had this that the sacrifice had to happen.
Yes.
In order for the sins to be forgiven.
Right.
And to open the doors to heaven, right?
Well, not only for sins to be forgiven, but for justice to be delivered. And so we believe in a God that is loving and just, and those two have to work in concert together. So if God does not rescue humanity, reach out to rescue humanity, then he is not loving. But if he does not punish evil for what evil is, then he is not just. And so both had to occur, and that required, and echoing again, Christ is the fulfillment of the Old Testament Jewish practice of substitutionary sacrifice, then we are without hope for salvation. That's number one. It's a theological, the relationship for our relationship with God to be healed, there had to be a substitutionary atonement in the form that we believe came through Jesus Christ. Number one. Number two, it matters for the sake of the credibility of the text, right? So if across the four Gospels and then the rest of the New Testament, if the text isn't accurately reflecting what happened to Jesus on the cross, then what else is it untrustworthy about? Forgive me for ending a sentence in a preposition, but about what else can it not be trusted? Right. Yeah. Yeah. No. Those are my two main points.
No. I kind of figured you were going to go down that road. So I'm just saying. But if both ascended to heaven,
right?
if the ascension happened in both faiths, and then the priesthood happened in both faiths. I know this. We got this little sliver of this sort of atonement thing. We got I just
little sliver that matters a big honking deal.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm not, like I said, devaluing that. But in Islam, it say that the likeness of Jesus was on the cross, and so then there you go. Or they said that it wasn't. The crucifixion didn't act long enough for him to die, and his soul, is immortal. So it really didn't. It really the transition happened because the crucifixion didn't wasn't long enough. But I guess there's a
is that in the Quran or is that elsewhere?
Well, I mean, we get into this interpretation of.
I'm not asking you to interpret. I'm just saying, where's the text of the claim that you just enunciated? I'm just purely for educational purposes.
Oh, so I mean, so we have. I mean, there's different components of the Quran that go over some of this,
right.
And so. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what it is. The An-Nisa, I think it is. It's going to be like Surah 4 or some. I think in the Quran. So and then there's quite a few. There's bits and bobs in the Quran, but this is the one. There's this one surah that talks about this, and I mean I can pull it up and I can go through it if you want.
No, we don't have to go through it. I'm just asking if it's something like that is in the Quran. Is it in the Hadith? Is it somewhere else? I was just wondering if.
So yeah, it's in the Quran. So here it is. We killed Jesus. Let me pull this up. So we killed the Christ Jesus, the Son of Mary. The messenger of Allah, but they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. And those who differ therein are full of doubts, with no, it's in parentheses type of thing, certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow. For of the surety they killed him not. May Allah raise him up upon himself, and Allah is exalted in power and wise, and that's Surah 4. Yeah, so
I'm not gonna press into questioning or interpreting at this point. I just was curious of the locus of that.
Yeah. So I mean, this is like one sentence, and it's got a lot of business in there.
Yeah. Right.
So like,
that's a good way to put it. A lot of business in there.
So I and if this is
wrecking most of the gospel claims in a few sentences, John says a lot of business in there.
The problem is, I was trying to. So okay, so here's the problem. Here's the challenge. Right? We got this in the Quran. Here it's here. So now we have to. This one. So here we got this one surah that we've got to figure that this is the reason. Come on, come on.
You got to do something with it.
So
as a text, we don't have time to on this episode, but we got to do something with it at some point.
I love it.
Gosh, look at that! Look at the time.
Like Jesus is Lord, Jesus is Christ, and that's it. That's all I have time for.
I'm looking at my wrist without a wristwatch on, as if Fletch, Chevy Chase's character, right. Fletch is like, oh, look at the time.
That's okay. So, anyways, I just wanted to get deeper into this. I think we should probably talk about this, and then we should get into like. Maybe we should get into the reports. We should get into the who's the guy? What is the guy that the testament of Jesus, the case for Jesus?
Yeah. Lee Strobel.
Yeah, we should talk. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but maybe there's why
the Case for Christ is a book written by Lee Strobel, who is a trained journalist, former trained journalist, I think at the Chicago Tribune. And he's a former atheist, and he set out to disprove. He was one of a few people across the last 100 years or so who've tried to set out to disprove objectively the crucifixion and resurrection. And so he has written a book called The Case for Christ, because along his journey, he discovered that it was very difficult to try to disprove, or at least the evidence was overwhelmingly against him. That's the summary.
It's a compelling book, and then they made a movie on Netflix, which is easier to watch. Yeah. So it is the little easier. So so this is the Surah. Yeah, this is the so I'll have to send it to you, and then maybe we could go back and forth on this a little bit more.
All right. Hey, one last question related to the quote true Muslim question.
Sure.
When people outside the Muslim faith try to do that, they try to assert what is and is not true Islam, does that make the efforts of Muslims within the faith who are trying to reform those violent areas of the faith, does that make life more difficult for them when people outside the faith are picking and choosing?
Yeah, just imagine this. If I can't go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on the dome, the dome mosque, the Dome of the Rock, in Jerusalem, and pray the way I want to pray, and I got to do taqiyya, I got to pretend to be Sunni, or I go to the National Mosque here and I get a bunch of Sunnis that gang up on me at the National Mosque in Massachusetts because I'm praying a certain way, and someone turns around to me who's not Muslim, says fake Muslims. Like it to me, it's like you're part of the gang.
Yeah.
So, and so it's I liken this to like this. There's a Jewish community in Mexico that pretends to be Catholic.
Okay.
Wow. And you happen to know someone. Yeah. Right? We have a common friend who's from Mexico, that has worked with us on this podcast. Whose family's gone through that.
Yeah, which is an absolutely fascinating experience.
So but that's taqiyya too. So it's just like the Jews during World War II. I know some of the Jews had to pretend to be a different religion to survive. That's so you're I don't know, you're kind of devaluing it, and then you're valuing that journey to come here. The whole argument of my family. Amir Rahman, this guy invaded all the way into a place called Kamdesh, which they called Kafiristan, land of the unbelievers, and forcibly converted everybody to Islam, which means what? That means that they took all the men and murdered them, took all the young children, brought them to Kabul, trained them, and then sold all the women and girls into slavery. That's my family's story 4 generations ago, and that's why I'm the approachable Muslim, and I built an entire career on being the guy that translates Western concepts of collective cultures in Islamic context in the reverse.
Yeah.
But in the same, and that's why I don't have the baggage. I'll go Salat out with any Muslim population. But the fact of the matter is that when you have a persecuted population and then you have one of the elders in the religious freedom movement talk about fake Muslims, well, he's now reiterating and pressing a narrative that is against what many of these people have struggled for, many of these groups have struggled for in Islam to survive, to get to a place where they can be religiously free, to not have a Catholic say they're fake Muslims.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but the fact of the matter is that I find it insulting. I find it terrifying. And because then it means that this person can go can dip into that camp and will be there with the torches.
Yeah, well, and to me, it's in the same spirit. It's maybe not as committed and maybe not as robustly developed or thought out, but to me, it strikes me as in the same spirit of what we see in the some of these religion registration laws, particularly in the former Soviet bloc that resurrect themselves, where like all the religion organizations, because we don't have the kind of the default U.S. style First Amendment thing there, they have all religious groups registered, right? And you have to be certified by the government, like some kind of religious affairs organization, right? And so like, Kazakhstan or Hungary, right? And so they're government people deciding, a government, even at its best, even if it's trying to be religiously neutral, which those aren't, I understand, but they're trying to presume upon themselves that they can decide what is true religion and what is true Christianity, what is true Islam, right? I mean, that's what we see in these breaches of religious freedom, is that they say, oh, we have religious freedom. Well, you scratch below the surface, and you and I both know, well, it's religious freedom for this particular sect of Islam and this particular sect of Christianity, and then everybody else, those dominant expressions of Islam and Christianity collude with the government to squelch the space for all the minority voices. And so that kind of dictation from without a religion as to who is true is really, really unhelpful. Now, I mean, I think there's still a sense that we can study a religion. You could study Christianity and recognize, oh, well, this is in the big picture Orthodox with a little o, Orthodox Christianity, or C.S. Lewis sense, mere Christianity, right? That would include the bulk of, Orthodox little o Christians throughout history. And I could more or less do the same with Islam, saying, okay, these are different, but they share a commonality, right?
Well, I mean, but even still, in the Amman conference, they've decided, the Ummah came together and decided what's mainstream Islam. And they didn't discount and say these other sects are not Islam. They said mainstream is this.
Right.
And it's 4 sects of Sunni, 4 sects of Shia. Yeah. But it goes back to what you're saying. Look, the Saudis have defined what Islam is within the construct of Wahhabism. Right. So we are all struggling at that because they export that narrative all over in the form of I would call it political aid, political, and that's in development initiatives, or even worse, terrorism. And the challenge is that government reinforces that. I mean, it wasn't Shia that knocked down the Twin Towers. It was Sunnis, and it was a Saudi prince, Osama bin Laden, with Saudis that knocked down those towers. Yeah. And Al Qaeda comes from them. So here's the problem: is that it goes back to does this guy think that's what true Islam is? That everybody else is fake? Is it a Wahhabi that's chirping into his ear? Yeah. Because they could be very persuasive. So.
Because you're not persuasive at all, John.
No, I'm not. But I'm just. I mean, here's the thing. But this is not an excuse of the Iranians and Shiism. I mean, the Supreme Council has a lot to answer for in Iran. These guys, they should. They're saying all the wrong things and doing all the wrong stuff. Yeah. Instead of saying we'll get rid of the nuclear program, but we want this, this, and this. We're open to negotiation. No. They're not saying that. It's all rhetoric. So but they've never attacked the West in the sense of attacking our homeland and creating an imminent threat here. And here's the other side of it. The only people that have been fighting, there's been the Kurds, there's been some international forces, but not a lot, but the Kurds, and there's been Shia militias that have been that destroyed ISIS. So the Shia are on the front line of fighting ISIS. They're on the front line of fighting Wahhabism on all fronts in the Middle East and Asia. So there's another whole nother side to this, and I'm not, like I said, I'm a Shia that's persecuted by 12ers. So I'm not advocating for these guys, but they're part of the Ummah, and I work with a lot of the different communities, whether it's Sunni or Shia, and am largely accepted, which is nice. But if I go to this, I just came back from the Shia mosque up in Silver Spring, and they were telling me I needed to do this, this, and this, the same way the Sunnis were telling me, and I go, I'm not the same guy as you, So I think it's a different struggle within the community. But I think that it's a little terrifying and very insulting, and when an outsider does it, but it also dilutes and devalues the struggle that I've had to get to here, both as on a grander scale, the family, and survive here as a refugee, the family of the descendant of refugees, but also you have a personal struggle with your own faith. Yeah. and it's sometimes it's solid and sometimes it's daily and sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. And then you're sitting there at Unga talking with one of the elders and he's talking about fake Muslims and you're going, what is that? Like a veiled insult? Like, what,
certainly in the practice where you're trying to build the international religious freedom movement, that kind of thing has got to be really unhelpful.
Well, one last point. My name is John Pinna. And people go, well, that's not a Muslim name. Well, guess what? You don't need a Muslim name. First of all, John in Islam, in Arabic is Yahya. That's what it is. That's John.
Yeah.
That's the translation of it. Guess what John is in Italian? Giovanni. In Russian, it's Ivan. That doesn't make me – it's a translatable name, right? Pinna, the word was Latinized. It's actually Panna was Latinized when we came through Italy to America, and it was Latinized to Pinna. So how it's like you're talking and people just make a slip judgment. They go, well, you didn't have a Muslim name, so you can't be Muslim. Oh, you're this, you're that, or ba ba ba. So it's the way of there's a manner in which I think the individuals approach different communities and different people, and they immediately are prepared to devalue based on what they know. And I can just be honest with you, Islam has never helped me in my career. We're doing this.
Really?
This is an unpaid, unsponsored. What's it called? When I left the construction industry, making $300,000 a year to make $40,000 a year at the American Islamic Congress. Yeah. When I left, I made $52,000 a year. So it hasn't helped me in my career. It hasn't helped me here or there or whatever. And I felt compelled to do this because of that was my sort of personal journey.
Right.
So. Yeah. There's no intrinsic value, but I'm not changing my name to Omar,
right?
Or Mohammed or this or that because I have a very good Muslim name, and I'm keeping it, and it's part of the culture of socializing what Islam really is, and Islam is not the stereotypes that people throw around, or certainly those that are non-Muslim like to press. And it's just disappointing when somebody who's an elder in the International Religious Freedom Movement has a phrase like fake Islam, and he's not referring to ISIS or Al Qaeda or those guys. He's referring to possibly me in that conversation.
Well, I doubt that, but point taken.
Yeah.
With that, we'll wrap up.
I appreciate you taking the time, man, and listening to this because sometimes I get a little crazy. So,
well, no, I think it's this conversation is one that we needed to have. Listeners can listen both at crossingphase.com or at anywhere you catch podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or TuneIn. And again, crossingphase.com. Follow us on Twitter at JT Pinna or at MT Hawk, and we would welcome your feedback for this show, and that includes critique, disagreement, show topics for future shows, and questions. And we'd love to hear them. Crossingphase.com. You can contact us there or on Twitter at crossingphase. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks, bud.
Thanks, John. This has been Crossing Phase with John Pinna and Matt Hawkins, podcast of Rolltop Productions. We'd appreciate your review of our program wherever you listen, especially in the iTunes Store, but we're also over at Google Podcasts, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and TuneIn. Music for this episode is provided by Vajra, whose music is available at thevajratemple.com, Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon. Show notes and other information is available at crossingfaiths.com.